He feared the alien Arachnid girl wanted to eat him, but her intentions were very different. David Reynolds had always prided himself on being a rational man. As a xenobiologist stationed on the frontier world of Proxima 7, he'd encountered his fair share of bizarre alien life forms. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for his current predicament, being thoroughly trapped in what appeared to be the galaxy's largest spiderweb, deep within an unexplored cavern system. "Well, this is just fucking perfect," he muttered, testing the silvery strands that held him suspended several feet above the ground. The material was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, stronger than steel, yet possessing an almost ethereal sheen that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The cave's bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie blue glow across the crystalline formation surrounding him, creating dancing shadows that played tricks with his mind. His heart thundered in his chest as he recalled the massive tracks he'd discovered leading into this cavern system, tracks that had prompted this ill-fated solo expedition in the first place. His research station's scanners had detected unusual energy signatures emanating from these caves 3 days ago. Being the curious, and as his colleagues often pointed out, somewhat reckless scientist that he was, David had volunteered to investigate. The initial findings had been fascinating, evidence of an unknown species with remarkable bioengineering capabilities. What he hadn't counted on was becoming part of the local food chain. A slight movement in the darkness caught his attention, and David felt his blood run cold. Something was approaching. Something big. The rhythmic tapping of multiple appendages against stone echoed through the cavern, growing louder with each passing second. "Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit!" he whispered, struggling futilely against his bonds. His pulse quickened as a massive silhouette emerged from the shadows. In the dim light, he could make out the outline of what appeared to be an enormous arachnid form. But as the creature stepped into the bioluminescent glow, David's terror transformed into stunned disbelief. Before him stood not a monster, but quite possibly the most striking being he'd ever encountered. She, and there was no doubt about the gender, had the upper body of a humanoid female with silvery skin that seemed to shimmer like starlight. Fiery red hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves that seemed to defy gravity. Her face was ethereally beautiful, with large multifaceted eyes that sparkled with intelligence and something else. Was that amusement? The lower half of her body was that of an arachnid, but far more elegant than any spider he'd ever studied. 8 legs covered in what appeared to be some sort of biomechanical armor moved with impossible grace as she approached him. Her entire form was clothed in a skin-tight bodysuit that seemed to shift between various shades of silver, perfectly complementing her natural coloring. "Well, well," she purred in perfect English, her voice carrying an exotic accent he couldn't quite place. "What have we here? A human male, all wrapped up like a present. How thoughtful of you to drop by." David opened his mouth to respond, but all that came out was a strangled squeak. The Spider-Woman's lips curved into a predatory smile that sent shivers down his spine, though whether from fear or something else entirely, he wasn't quite sure. "I'm Nita," she said, moving closer with fluid grace. "And you, my unexpected guest, are about to make my night very interesting indeed." Nita circled David with predatory grace, each movement a calculated dance that made his breath catch. Her multifaceted eyes sparkled with curiosity and something more intense, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "I've been studying your species for quite some time," she said, trailing a delicate finger along his jawline. "Humans are fascinating creatures, so full of contradictions. You fear what you don't understand, yet you're driven by an insatiable curiosity to explore the unknown." David tried to maintain his scientific composure, but her proximity was making it increasingly difficult. "You speak our language perfectly," he managed, proud that his voice remained steady. "How long have you been observing us?" She laughed, a melodious sound that echoed through the crystal cave. "Oh, darling, I've been watching your research station since it was established. Your species' attempts at understanding alien life forms are quite entertaining." Her fingers traced patterns on his chest, sending shivers through him despite the protective suit he wore. "Though I must say, your personal research methods are rather reckless. Walking into an unknown cave system alone? Tsk, tsk. I'm beginning to think that wasn't my brightest moment, David admitted, trying to ignore how his heart rate increased with each touch, though the results are proving quite educational. Indeed, Nita's smile widened, revealing perfect teeth that gleamed in the bioluminescent light. And what exactly are you learning, Doctor? Reynolds Hanamernas. The fact that she knew his name shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. That my xenobiology textbooks need serious updating for one thing. Your species isn't documented anywhere in our databases. The Arachnidians prefer to remain selective about our interactions, she purred, her lower body shifting closer. The biomechanical armor on her spider legs caught the light, creating mesmerizing patterns. Though I've decided to make an exception in your case. Why me? David asked, genuinely curious despite his compromising position. Because you're different from the others at your station, Nita replied, her expression becoming more serious. You see beauty where others see monsters. Your research notes about the local fauna, they're not just clinical observations. You appreciate the wonder of each creature you study. David felt his face flush. You've read my personal research logs? Every word, she confirmed, looking rather pleased with herself. Your encryption was child's play to bypass. I particularly enjoyed your poetic descriptions of the crystal butterflies in the southern hemisphere. Living stained glass carried on wings of light. Quite romantic for a scientific journal. I try to capture the essence of what I observe, he said, becoming increasingly aware of how close she was. Her scent was intoxicating, something like starlight and exotic flowers, if such things had a smell. And how would you describe me, Doctor? Reynolds? Nita asked, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. What essence would you capture in your logs? David swallowed hard, his scientific mind warring with more primal instincts. You're unlike anything I've ever encountered. A perfect fusion of arachnid and humanoid characteristics, with biomechanical adaptations that suggest an incredibly advanced evolution or engineering. Your movement patterns suggest both predator and dancer. Your intelligence is clearly superior to… No, Nita interrupted, pressing a finger to his lips. That's the scientist speaking. I want to know what the man sees. The web's strange properties seemed to pulse in response to her touch, and David felt the strands shift, allowing him to move more freely while still keeping him suspended. It was less like being trapped and more like floating in a silvery cocoon. I see beauty, he admitted finally, his voice rough. Dangerous beauty, like a supernova or a black hole. Something that could destroy you, but you can't look away. Nita's eyes darkened with pleasure. Now that's more like it. You humans have such a wonderful way with words when you let yourselves feel instead of think. Is that what this is about? David asked. Studying human emotions? Partially, she admitted, her hands moving to release more of the web's tension. But mostly, I'm tired of watching from afar. My people believe that true understanding comes from intimate interaction. The way she said intimate made David's entire body tingle. And what exactly does that entail? Well, Nita said, her smile turning mischievous, first I'm going to release you from this web. Then we're going to have a fascinating cultural exchange that I'm quite certain will revolutionize human-Arachnidian relations. That is… She paused, studying his face. If you're interested in being my first test subject… Test subject? David couldn't help but laugh. Is that what we're calling it? Would you prefer or search partner? Her fingers traced the outline of his jaw again. I promise the methodology will be thoroughly enjoyable. And if I say no, then I release you, you return to your station, and we both pretend this never happened, Nita said simply. Consent is rather important in my culture. We may be predators, but we're not monsters. David looked at her, really looked at her. Beyond the alien beauty and the dangerous allure, he saw intelligence, humor, and genuine interest. His scientific mind was screaming about the opportunity to learn about an unknown species, while the rest of him was focused on much less academic pursuits. Well then, Nita, he said, his voice husky, I believe I'm ready to participate in your research project. Her smile was radiant. Excellent choice, Dr. Reynolds. Now let's begin with some hands-on experimentation. The crystal cave had transformed from a trap into something magical. Nita's web, now reconfigured into a comfortable lounging area, glowed with a soft, silvery light that complemented the natural bioluminescence of the cavern. David sat cross-legged on the surprisingly comfortable webbing, his scientific tablet in hand, while Nita gracefully reclined beside him. "So your species actually produces different types of silk for different purposes?" David asked, fascinated by the technical discussion that had somehow become foreplay. "The structural properties must be incredible." Nita's laugh echoed through the cave. "Always the scientist even now?" She traced a pattern on his arm that made his skin tingle. "But yes, we have specialized glands for various silk types. This particular variety," she gestured to their silken seat, "is reserved for special occasions." "Special occasions?" David raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite the heat rising in his cheeks. "Would you care to elaborate on that for my research?" "Oh, I think a practical demonstration would be more educational," Nita purred, her multifaceted eyes sparkling with mischief. She produced a strand of silk that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "For instance, this type is specifically designed for sensory enhancement." David watched, mesmerized, as she wrapped the silk around his wrist. The material felt alive against his skin, sending pleasant tingles up his arm. "The neurological implications are fascinating," he managed to say, his voice slightly hoarse. "The silk seems to interact directly with the nervous system." "Indeed," Nita moved closer, her silver skin catching the bioluminescent light. "My people believe that true understanding comes from experiencing rather than just observing. Would you like to experience more?" "For science, of course." "For science," David Reynolds, his attempt at professional detachment crumbling, as Nita's fingers traced along his jawline. "Though I should point out that my own research methods might seem rather primitive in comparison." "On the contrary," Nita's voice dropped to a sultry whisper, "I find human methods of investigation quite stimulating. Your curiosity, your passion for discovery, it's incredibly attractive." The air between them crackled with tension as scientific curiosity merged with something far more primal. David found himself studying the way her fiery hair seemed to move of its own accord, how her biomechanical spider legs created intricate patterns in the web beneath them. "Your species' adaptations are remarkable," he said, reaching out to touch one of her mechanical legs. The metal was warm under his fingers, vibrating slightly with an inner energy. "The integration of biological and mechanical components is seamless." "We evolved alongside our technology," Nita explained, clearly enjoying his touch. "Just as your species evolved to be incredibly adaptable." Her hands moved to his shoulders, exploring the muscle structure. "Your physical form is fascinating. So different from ours, yet somehow perfectly complementary." Their research session became increasingly intimate as they explored their physiological differences and surprising similarities. Every touch was both a scientific observation and an expression of growing desire. Nita's silk created a cocoon of sensation around them, while David's human warmth seemed to draw them closer together. "You know," David said between increasingly heated kisses, "when I came to this planet, I never expected to revolutionize interspecies relations quite like this." Nita laughed against his neck, the sound sending shivers down his spine. "And I never expected to find a human who could match both my intellectual and other appetites." Her hands traced patterns on his chest that seemed to burn through his clothing. "Though I must admit, I've been hoping to find someone like you since I first started studying your species." "Is that why you set this trap?" David asked, gesturing to the web around them. "Were you specifically targeting xenobiologists?" "Actually, I was hoping to catch someone with an open mind and an adventurous spirit," Nita admitted, her expression turning slightly sheepish. "The fact that you're a xenobiologist is just a delightful bonus, though your scientific background certainly makes the cultural exchange more interesting." Their conversation became more fragmented as their exploration became more thorough. Every discovery led to new questions. Every answer led to more intimate investigations. The cave's crystals seemed to pulse in rhythm with their increasingly passionate research. "Your thermal regulation is remarkable," Nita murmured, her silver skin growing warmer where it touched his. "And the way your body responds to stimulus—" "Speak for yourself," David managed to reply, fascinated by how her biomechanical components seemed to resonate with their shared energy. Your entire physiological system is adapting to match mine. The implications for biotechnology are incredible. Always the scientist, Nita teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. Even when we're about to conduct a thorough investigation of interspecies compatibility, David suggested with a grin. Exactly, Amananti, Nita agged Reynolds, pulling him closer. Now, shall we proceed with the practical portion of our research? The cave's bioluminescent light dimmed discreetly as their scientific curiosity gave way to more primal interests, their bodies finding an unexpected but perfect harmony. The crystal formations around them seemed to sing with resonant frequencies as two very different species discovered just how compatible they could be. The first light of Proxima 7's twin suns was just beginning to filter through the cave's crystal formations when David's comm unit erupted with urgent beeping. He stirred reluctantly from the comfortable silk cocoon where he and Nita had spent the night, their bodies still intertwined in a perfect blend of human and arachnid anatomy. Ignore it, Nita murmured sleepily, her fiery hair cascading across his chest. The research station can survive without their favorite xenobiologist for a few more hours? David chuckled, pressing a kiss to her silvery forehead. As tempting as that sounds. The comm unit's increasingly insistent beeping cut him off. That's the emergency frequency. Nita's multifaceted eyes fully opened, suddenly alert. Then you should answer it, though I must say your species has terrible timing. With obvious reluctance, David reached for his comm unit. Commander Chen's holographic image appeared, looking unusually agitated. Reynolds, where the hell have you been? We've got a situation here. The station's defensive shields are failing, and our sensors are picking up massive energy signatures approaching from the planet's northern hemisphere. David sat up straighter, his scientific mind immediately engaging despite his body's protest. What kind of energy signatures? Unlike anything we've seen before. They're similar to the readings you were investigating yesterday, but exponentially stronger. We need your expertise here immediately. Nita, who had been listening intently, touched David's arm. Her expression was concern. Those would be the harvesters, she whispered, quiet enough that the comm unit wouldn't pick up her voice. They come every solar cycle to collect resources. Usually they avoid human settlements, but if your shields are down… David's blood ran cold. He looked between Nita and the commander's hologram, making a split-second decision. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Commander. Have the sensor data ready for analysis. After ending the transmission, he turned to Nita. How bad is this? The harvesters are mindless drones, she explained, her biomechanical legs shifting nervously. They're attracted to energy signatures and will strip mine anything in their path. Your station's shields usually mask its energy output, but without them… We're a beacon, David finished grimly. I have to go. Nita nodded but caught his hand as he started to dress. I can help. My people developed countermeasures against the harvesters centuries ago. But, she hesitated, it would mean revealing my existence to your people. David paused, torn between his desire to protect her and the need to save the station. It's not that I'm ashamed of you, he said quickly, but humans can be unpredictable when faced with new species, especially ones that challenge their preconceptions about life forms. You mean ones that look like they're nightmares but act like they're fantasies? Nita's lips curved in a knowing smile. I understand, darling. I'll stay here, but take this. She produced a small crystalline device from a compartment in her biomechanical armor. It's a harmonic resonator. It should disrupt the harvester's navigation systems. David took the device, marveling at its elegant design. How do I activate it? Just connect it to your station's power grid. The crystals will attune to the energy frequency automatically. She pulled him close for a passionate kiss that left him dizzy. Now go save your people, my brave scientist, but promise you'll return to continue our research. Wild harvesters couldn't keep me away, David promised, reluctantly pulling away from her embrace. Besides, we've barely scratched the surface of our compatibility studies. And I have so many more experiments in mind, Nita purred, her eyes promising future delights that made David's heart race. Just make sure you survive to participate in them. As David hurried through the cave system toward the station, his mind raced with both scientific calculations and memories of the night before. The weight of the crystal resonator in his pocket reminded him of the incredible trust Nita had placed in him, Trust he was determined not to betray. The research station came into view, its usually invisible shield flickering erratically. In the distance, dark shapes moved across the horizon like a swarm of mechanical locusts. The harvesters were coming. Inside the station's control room, chaos reigned. Scientists rushed between monitoring stations while security personnel attempted to boost power to the failing shields. "Reynolds!" Commander Chen called out. "What did you find in those caves? These energy signatures are off the charts." David clutched Nita's resonator, choosing his words carefully. "I discovered some unusual crystal formations with unique harmonic properties. In fact," he pulled out the device, "I think this might help." The commander eyed the alien technology suspiciously. "Where did you get that? Would you believe me if I said I made it from cave crystals?" David attempted a disarming smile. "Look, we can discuss the details after we save the station. Right now, we need to connect this to the main power grid." For a tense moment, Commander Chen studied David's face. Then the station shuddered as the first wave of harvesters approached and decision time was over. "Do it," Chen ordered, "but afterward, we're going to have a long talk about your solo expeditions." David worked quickly, following Nita's instructions to interface the resonator with the station systems. As soon as the connection was made, the crystals began to pulse with an inner light. A high-pitched tone, just at the edge of human hearing, emanated from the device. The effect on the approaching harvesters was immediate and dramatic. The mechanical swarms scattered, their precise formation dissolving into chaos. Within minutes, they had reversed course, retreating toward the northern horizon. The control room erupted in cheers, but David barely heard them. His thoughts were already back in the crystal cave, with the remarkable being who had saved them all, the being who had completely transformed his understanding of both alien life and his own heart. "Impressive work, Reynolds," Commander Chen clapped him on the shoulder. "Now about those caves." David smiled diplomatically, already formulating cover stories that would protect Nita while satisfying his superior's curiosity. After all, he had a lot more research to conduct, and he intended to keep his study subject all to himself. The next few weeks became an intricate dance of deception and desire for David. By day, he fabricated research about crystal harmonics to satisfy Commander Chen's curiosity. By night, he sneaked away to the cave system for more intimate research sessions with Nita. "Your colleagues are becoming quite persistent," Nita observed one evening, watching David set up what appeared to be a legitimate research station in the outer chamber of her cave. Her biomechanical legs clicked softly against the crystal floor as she helped him arrange equipment. "Doctor, Parker tried to follow you yesterday," David groaned, remembering how he'd had to take a ridiculously circuitous route to lose his overeager colleague. They're fascinated by the resonator's success. The military's even talking about developing it into a planetary defense system. Nita's multifaceted eyes sparkled with amusement as she wrapped her arms around him from behind. If only they knew the real secret to the technology was a beautiful alien spider woman who fell for a handsome human scientist. Speaking of falling, David turned in her embrace, his hands finding their way to her silvery skin. "I still can't believe you actually engineered that whole web trap scenario." "Well," Nita purred, her fiery hair seeming to dance with mischief, "I had to get your attention somehow, though I must admit, your initial terror was quite adorable." "Adorable?" David raised an eyebrow. "I was conducting a serious scientific investigation." "Oh yes, very serious," Nita teased, tracing patterns on his chest that made his breath catch. "I particularly enjoyed your field notes from that first encounter." "What was it?" Subject appears to be an unprecedented example of convergent evolution, combining arachnid characteristics with humanoid features in a remarkably aesthetic configuration. "You hacked my personal logs again?" "Naturally, though I prefer your later entries." Her voice dropped to a sultry whisper. "Subject's biomechanical adaptations display unexpected compatibility with human physiology, requiring extensive further study." David felt his face flush. "That was meant to be encrypted." "Darling, your encryption is cute, but my people were developing quantum computers while humans were still arguing about whether the Earth was flat." She kissed him softly. "Besides, I find your scientific objectivity incredibly arousing." Their playful banter was interrupted by David's comm unit. He checked the message and sighed. Commander Chen wants another progress report on the crystal research tomorrow morning. Then we should probably create some actual data for you to show him, Nita said practically, though her hands continued their distracting exploration. What if we set up some genuine crystal resonance experiments? Nothing that would reveal my existence, of course, but enough to support your cover story. David stared at her admiringly. You're brilliant, you know that. I know, she agreed, Reynolds with a grin. Now help me calibrate these sensors. The sooner we finish the legitimate research, the sooner we can return to our more personal investigations. They worked together efficiently, setting up a series of experiments that would produce legitimate scientific data while carefully obscuring its true source. Nita's extensive knowledge of crystalline technology, combined with David's understanding of human scientific expectations, created a perfect smokescreen. You know, David said as they worked, I never expected my career in xenobiology to involve quite so much creative writing. Consider it practice for our eventual publication, Nita suggested. Cross-species romance, a scientific approach to interstellar relations. It could revolutionize the field. Right after it gets me court-martialed, David laughed, but there was a touch of genuine concern in his voice. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if they discovered you. The military would probably... Nita silenced him with a kiss that made his toes curl. Let's not worry about hypotheticals. Besides, my people have been avoiding human detection for centuries. We're rather good at it. Is that why you live in these caves? David asked, genuine scientific curiosity mixing with personal interest. The crystals interfere with most scanning technology. Partly, Nita admitted, adjusting one of the sensors with her delicate fingers. Though mostly I chose this location because it reminded me of home. The crystalline formations are similar to our architecture on... She caught herself. Well, let's just say my homeworld has a lot of sparkly bits too. David noticed her hesitation but didn't press. They both had secrets they needed to keep. Instead, he focused on the way the cave's bioluminescence played across her silver skin, creating patterns that never ceased to fascinate him. You're staring again, Doctor. Reynolds, Nita noted without looking up from her work. Observing, he corrected. It's what scientists do. And what conclusions have your observations led to? That I'm the luckiest xenobiologist in the galaxy, he said honestly. Even if I can never publish my most important discoveries? Nita's expression softened. You humans have such a wonderful way of making scientific pursuits sound romantic. She moved closer, her biomechanical legs creating a mesmerizing dance of shadows. Perhaps we should conduct some more intimate observations. But the experiments are running perfectly well on their own, she finished, pulling him toward her silken nest. Besides, I believe we still have several hypotheses about cross-species compatibility to test. As David allowed himself to be led away from the legitimate research setup, he reflected that his life had become wonderfully complicated. He was living a double life, a respected xenobiologist by day, a secret alien lover by night. It should have been stressful, maybe even terrifying, but instead it felt right. The crystals seemed to pulse in agreement as Nita's web enveloped them both, creating their own private universe where species differences meant nothing and scientific curiosity led to the most intimate of discoveries. The message from Earth Central Command arrived during one of David's morning briefings with Commander Chen. As the holographic transmission played, David felt his world tilting on its axis. In recognition of your groundbreaking work with crystalline harmonics technology, we are offering you the position of Chief Xenobiological Research Director at the Terra Nova Institute. This prestigious appointment includes full funding for your research, a state-of-the-art laboratory, and... The words continued, but David's mind had already drifted to the crystal caves, to silvery skin and fiery hair, to nights filled with wonder and discovery. This was everything he'd ever dreamed of professionally, before he'd discovered dreams he never knew he could have. Congratulations, Reynolds. Commander Chen's voice broke through his thoughts. This is an incredible opportunity. The Terra Nova Institute? That's the top research facility in the solar system. David managed a weak smile. Yes, sir. It's quite an honor. They want you there within the month, Chen continued, scanning the details. We'll miss your expertise here, but this is the chance of a lifetime. A month. 4 weeks to either leave behind the most extraordinary discovery and relationship in human history, or throw away the career opportunity most scientists would kill for. That evening, David made his way to the caves with a heavy heart. He found Nita in their usual chamber, working on what appeared to be an upgrade to their crystal resonance equipment. The sight of her, graceful, brilliant, and utterly unique, made his chest ache. "I can tell by your face that something's wrong," Nita said, her multifaceted eyes studying him intently. "Did Dr. Parker finally figure out how to follow you here?" David shook his head, dropping onto their silken lounging area. "I've been offered a position on Earth, Chief Research Director at the Terra Nova Institute." Nita's biomechanical legs stilled, the only sign that the news had affected her. "That's quite an achievement," she said carefully. "When do they want you to start?" "A month." David ran a hand through his hair. "It's everything I ever wanted before you got caught in a spider's web." Nita's attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the emotion in her voice. She moved closer, her silver skin catching the crystal light. "You should take it." David's head snapped up. "What?" "The position. You should accept it." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for him. "This is your dream, David. The chance to advance human understanding of the universe, to make real changes in how your species approaches xenobiology. But what about us, our research, our ... He gestured helplessly between them, unable to find a word that encompassed everything they'd become to each other. Nita's smile was bittersweet. "Our unexpected experiment in cross-species compatibility?" She traced his jaw with delicate fingers. "That's exactly why you should go. You understand now, in a way no other human does, that the universe is full of wonders beyond imagination. You could help prepare your people for the day when they're ready to discover those wonders." "I don't want to prepare people for wonders," David said, pulling her close. "I want to live them, with you." "Such a romantic scientist," Nita murmured against his neck. "But think about it logically. Your research here, even disguised, has already advanced human understanding of alien technology. Imagine what you could do with full funding and resources." "I'd be researching the wrong things," David argued. "Crystal harmonics are just a tiny fraction of what your people know. The real breakthroughs, the real wonders, they're all here with you." "David," Nita started, but he cut her off with a kiss that made her biomechanical components hum with energy. "No," he said when they finally parted. "I've spent my whole career studying life forms across the galaxy, but it wasn't until I met you that I truly understood what it means to be alive. To connect with another being so completely that species differences become meaningless." Nita's eyes sparkled with emotion. "You humans are remarkably adaptable. It's one of your most fascinating qualities." "Then let me adapt here," David said. "I'll tell Commander Chen I'm declining the position, that my research here is too important to abandon." "And what about your career? Your dreams?" David laughed softly. "My dreams changed the moment you stepped out of the shadows and scared the hell out of me. Besides," he added with a grin, "can you imagine trying to explain to the Terra Nova Institute why their chief research director keeps sneaking off to alien caves?" "You could always claim you're conducting field research," Nita suggested, her humor returning. "Very thorough, hands-on field research." "Speaking of hands-on research," David pulled her closer, reveling in the way their bodies fit together despite their differences. "I believe we have some ongoing experiments that require attention." "Always the dedicated scientist," Nita purred, her web beginning to cocoon around them. Though I must say, your research methods have improved significantly since our first encounter." "Well, I had an excellent teacher," David murmured as the crystal light dimmed accommodatingly. "One who showed me that the most important discoveries aren't always the ones you can publish." As they lost themselves in each other, David knew he'd made the right choice. The Terra Nova Institute could offer him prestige, funding, and professional recognition. But none of that could compare to the wonder of loving someone who had transformed his greatest fear into his greatest joy. Tomorrow he would decline the position and face Commander Chen's disappointment. He would continue his careful dance of legitimate research and hidden truth. But tonight, in their crystal cave with their private stars glowing above them, none of that mattered. He had found something far more precious than professional success. He had found a love that transcended species, a connection that defied scientific explanation, in a partnership that promised endless discoveries yet to come. Commander Chen's reaction to David's decision was unexpected. Instead of disappointment, the older man's face broke into a knowing smile. I had a feeling you might decline, he said, leaning back in his chair. There's something here you're not telling me about, isn't there, Reynolds? David maintained his poker face, though his heart rate accelerated. Sir, no one turns down the Terra Nova Institute without a damn good reason. Chen's eyes sparkled with interest. So I'm giving you an offer of my own. Complete autonomy in your research, no questions asked, as long as you keep producing results. Before David could respond, Chen's comm unit chimed. His expression darkened as he read the message. Well, it seems Earth Central Command is also curious about your decision. They're sending an investigative team, arrives tomorrow. David felt the blood drain from his face. Tomorrow? Don't worry, Chen said, raising a hand. I'll run interference. Whatever you're working on out there, it's clearly important enough to sacrifice your dream job for. Just try to make it look good when they visit. That evening, David practically ran to the crystal caves. He found Nita already in crisis mode, her biomechanical legs moving in agitated patterns as she reconfigured their research setup. I know, she said before he could speak. My monitoring systems picked up their approaching ship. Earth Central Command's finest investigators coming to stick their noses where they don't belong. Despite his anxiety, David couldn't help but smile. You hacked their communications again? Naturally. Nita paused in her work to give him a quick kiss that left him tingling. Their encryption is adorably primitive, but we have work to do. Commander Chen's offer of autonomy is perfect timing, and we can use it to our advantage. How? By giving them exactly what they expect to see, Nita said, her multifaceted eyes gleaming with mischief. A brilliant but eccentric scientist, so absorbed in his groundbreaking research that he turned down any other opportunity. She gestured to the cave around them, where her silk was already transforming the space. The outer chambers were becoming a legitimate research facility, complete with crystal formations arranged in precise patterns. Deeper inside, their private sanctuary remained hidden behind clever optical illusions, created by web and crystal. You've been busy, David observed, admiring her work. I protect what's mine, Nita said with a possessive growl that sent shivers down his spine. Now help me set up these crystal matrices. We need to make this look impressive enough to satisfy their curiosity without revealing anything too revolutionary. They worked through the night, Nita's alien technology and David's human scientific knowledge combining to create a convincing research facility. By morning, the outer caves looked like exactly what Earth Central would expect, an advanced crystalline harmonics laboratory. Remember, Nita said as dawn approached, you're not hiding anything. You're just so focused on your work that you barely notice them. Humans expect genius scientists to be a little unusual. Unusual? David raised an eyebrow. You mean like falling in love with an alien spider woman? Exactly, Nita purred, pulling him close, though that part we'll keep to ourselves. Her kiss was both passionate and reassuring. Now go. Be brilliant. Be distracted. Be human. The investigative team arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor strike, three stern-faced officials in pristine uniforms, led by a doctor. Harrison, whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary. Dr. Reynolds, Harrison said, shaking David's hand firmly. Quite a setup you have here. Perhaps you could explain why this research is more important than advancing human science at the Terra Nova Institute? David channeled his inner absent-minded professor, launching into a detailed explanation of crystal harmonics that he knew would make their eyes glaze over. He led them through the outer caves, demonstrating experiments that were impressive enough to justify his decision, while being just theoretical enough to avoid too many questions. You see, he said, adjusting a crystal formation while barely looking at his visitors, the resonance patterns suggest possibilities far beyond our current understanding of matter-energy interactions. The Terra Nova Institute's focus is too narrow, too conventional. Here, I can pursue the real breakthroughs. Harrison frowned. And you achieve these breakthroughs alone? In caves? The isolation helps me think, David said vaguely, pretending to be distracted by a reading. Besides, the crystals only respond properly in their natural environment. As if on cue, one of Nita's carefully prepared demonstrations activated, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the cave walls. The investigator stepped back, suitably impressed. Remarkable, Harrison admitted, but surely with proper funding. No, no, impossible, David interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. The ambient conditions here are unique. Moving the research would set me back years. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to adjust these matrices before the next harmonic cycle. He turned his back on them, pretending to be absorbed in his work. Behind him, he heard Harrison sigh. Well, Commander Chen, the investigator said, it seems Dr. Reynolds' dedication to his research is genuine, if perhaps somewhat obsessive. He's the best xenobiologist I've ever worked with, Chen replied proudly, even if his methods are unconventional. The team left shortly after, satisfied that they'd found exactly what they expected. A brilliant scientist too caught up in his work to care about career advancement. As their footsteps faded, David felt a familiar silken strand brush his neck. Brilliant performance, Nita whispered from her hiding place in the shadows, though I particularly enjoyed the part where you called their understanding conventional. David turned to find her trying to suppress her laughter. Well, compared to my current research partner, they are rather limited in their perspective. Speaking of perspective, Nita said, emerging fully from the shadows, I believe we should celebrate our successful deception. I have some very unconventional experiments in mind. Do these experiments involve your special silk? David asked, already being drawn into her web. Among other things, Nita purred. After all, we need to maintain your reputation as a dedicated researcher. As the crystal lights dimmed accommodatingly, David reflected that his life had become wonderfully complicated. But with Commander Chen's protection and the investigators satisfied, they could continue their unique partnership in peace. And if anyone wondered why the brilliant but eccentric Dr. Reynolds spent so much time in his caves, well, that was just the price of scientific dedication. The fact that his research partner was the most fascinating being in the galaxy, that would remain their secret. 1 month after successfully deceiving the Earth Central Command investigators, David entered the crystal caves to find them transformed. Nita's silk, interwoven with the natural crystal formations, had created something breathtaking, a perfect fusion of their two worlds. The outer chambers still maintained their scientific facade, but beyond them, the cave system had become a spectacular crystalline palace. Bioluminescent light played through silk-enhanced crystal structures, creating an ethereal atmosphere that took his breath away. Do you like it? Nita's voice came from above. She descended on a strand of shimmering silk, her silver skin and fiery hair creating mesmerizing patterns in the light. I've been working on it whenever you were at the station. It's incredible, David breathed, taking in the intricate details. The walls were lined with a combination of crystal formations and specialized silk that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Living quarters had been crafted that perfectly accommodated both human and Arachnidian anatomy. But why? Because, Nita said, landing gracefully beside him, I'm tired of hiding in shadows. I want to build a real home with you. She guided him deeper into their crystal palace, to a central chamber where an elaborate web structure hung suspended in the space. This, she said, suddenly seeming nervous, is a binding web. In my culture, when we choose a life partner, we weave one together. Her multifaceted eyes searched his face. I know it's not a human tradition, but David cut her off with a kiss that made her biomechanical components hum with energy. Are you asking me to marry you in Arachnidian style? Well, Nita said, her silver skin flushing slightly. Considering how our relationship began, with you caught in my web, terrified I was going to eat you, I thought it was appropriate to make it official with another web. She laughed softly. Although this time you know exactly what my intentions are. To think I was scared of you, David mused, pulling her close. Now I can't imagine my life without you. Humans are remarkably adaptable, Nita purred. It's one of your most attractive qualities. She guided his hands to the binding web. This silk is special. It responds to both our biosignatures. If you accept, we weave our patterns together, creating a permanent bond. Show me how, David said without hesitation. The next hour was spent in an intimate dance of web weaving, with Nita teaching David the ancient art of her people. Their patterns merged and intertwined, creating something unique, neither fully human nor fully Arachnidian, but perfectly them. There's one more surprise, Nita said when they finished. She led him to what appeared to be a laboratory space, but unlike anything he'd seen before. I've been consulting with my people, We think it's time for a controlled revelation of our existence? David stared at her in shock. You mean? We start small, she explained. Published papers about theoretical cross-species compatibility, gradual introduction of more advanced concepts, all through your legitimate research, of course. Her eyes sparkled. After all, you did give up the Terra Novi Institute for me. I think it's time you got some professional recognition for your actual discoveries. But won't your people object? They've been watching us, Nita admitted. Our relationship has become something of a case study in human Arachnidian relations. They're quite impressed with how you've handled everything, especially your choice to stay here instead of advancing your career. David laughed, shaking his head. So all this time, we weren't really hiding? Oh, we were hiding from your people, Nita corrected. Mine just have better cloaking technology. She wrapped her arms around him. Besides, they're rather entertained by the whole story. The human scientist who feared the Spider-Woman wanted to eat him, only to end up falling in love with her instead. It's becoming quite the romantic tale among my people. Well, David said, pulling her closer, it is a pretty good story, though I think the ending is my favorite part. Oh, Nita's eyebrow arched elegantly. And what ending is that? The part where we create something beautiful together, he said, gesturing to their crystal palace in the binding web, where fear turns to love and differences become strengths. My brilliant xenobiologist, Nita purred, guiding him toward their private sanctuary. Who would have thought your greatest discovery would come from getting caught in my web? Best mistake I ever made, David replied, following her into their silken haven, though I wouldn't call it a mistake anymore. More like destiny with an unexpected twist. As the crystal lights dimmed around them, David reflected on how far they'd come. From that first moment of terror in the cave to this, a home that blended both their worlds, a future that promised both professional and personal fulfillment, and a love that transcended species. The next morning, as they lay wrapped in silk in each other, watching the twin suns rise through crystal-enhanced windows, Nita traced patterns on his chest. No regrets about staying, about choosing this life. David caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. Only one, that I ever feared you in the first place. Oh, I don't know, Nita said with a mischievous smile. I rather enjoyed watching you transform from terrified scientist to devoted partner. Besides, she added, pulling him closer, I think a little fear can be exciting, don't you? Their laughter echoed through the rare crystal palace, a sound of joy, love, and the promise of endless discoveries yet to come.